She laughed so loudly that half the auction yard turned to look. 5 days later, nobody would be laughing. The Saturday morning sun hung low above the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina, casting long golden shadows across rows of forgotten vehicles. Rusted pickups, damaged sedans, old farm trucks, machines that had been abandoned by their owners and nearly forgotten by the world. Most people walked through the auction yard searching for bargains. Others came looking for parts. A few came hoping to find treasure. Jack Carter came because hope was cheaper than giving up. At 41 years old, Jack knew exactly what it felt like to be overlooked. Life had taught him that lesson repeatedly. His small repair garage barely covered the bills each month. Every unexpected expense felt like a storm cloud gathering overhead. Yet every morning he still unlocked the shop door, rolled up his sleeves, and kept moving forward. Not because it was easy, because his 11-year-old daughter was watching. Emily Carter walked beside him through the auction yard, carrying a notebook almost as worn as her favorite pair of sneakers. She loved drawing old cars. She loved hearing her father's stories about engines and racing history. More than anything, she believed her father could see things other people missed. "Anything interesting yet?" she asked as they passed a row of battered vehicles. Jack smiled. "Depends on how much rust you consider interesting." Emily laughed softly. "You always say that." Because it is true. The scent of motor oil drifted through the warm air. Auctioneers called out numbers in the distance. Buyers negotiated prices. Somewhere nearby, an old engine coughed to life before falling silent again. It was noisy, busy, ordinary, until Jack stopped walking. At the far edge of the yard sat a faded coupe covered in dust. The paint had almost completely lost its shine. One tire sat partially flat. The windshield carried years of neglect across its surface. It looked like the kind of vehicle most buyers would pass without a second glance. Yet something about it pulled at his attention. Emily noticed immediately. "You found one." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Maybe. That means yes." He stepped closer. The coupe sat quietly beneath the sunlight, forgotten by everyone around it. Jack moved slowly around the vehicle, studying details most people would never notice. Body lines, weld points, trim pieces, tiny imperfections hidden beneath years of wear. He said nothing. Emily remained silent too. She had learned long ago that when her father became this focused, it was best not to interrupt. A sharp voice suddenly cut through the moment. "Please tell me you are not actually looking at that thing." Jack turned. A woman stood nearby wearing designer sunglasses and an expensive cream-colored jacket that looked completely out of place in an auction yard. Vanessa Hartwell, a successful real estate investor whose face regularly appeared in local business magazines. Several people stood around her, laughing at something she had said moments earlier. Vanessa glanced toward the dusty coupe and shook her head. "I have seen lawn ornaments with more value." A few people laughed. Jack simply smiled politely and returned his attention to the vehicle. Vanessa seemed almost amused by his lack of reaction. "Seriously," she continued. "Nobody wants that car." Emily frowned but remained quiet. Jack ran his hand lightly across the dusty hood. There was a feeling he could not explain. Not certainty, not excitement, just curiosity, the kind that whispered instead of shouted. The auction eventually reached the forgotten coupe. The auctioneer barely sounded interested when he introduced it. Several buyers checked their phones. Others began drifting toward newer inventory. Nobody appeared eager to bid. $120, the auctioneer called. Silence followed. Jack raised his hand. $120. Vanessa blinked, then laughed. Not cruelly, not angrily, just confidently. The laughter spread quickly through the nearby crowd. "You paid $120 for that?" she asked. More laughter followed. Emily lowered her eyes. Jack simply nodded. "Looks that way." Vanessa shook her head in disbelief. "Well, I guess everyone needs a hobby." The crowd chuckled again. The auctioneer completed the sale. The gavel struck. Just like that, the dusty old coupe belonged to Jack Carter. Most people immediately forgot about it and moved on. But as Jack walked toward the vehicle, something caught his eye near the lower edge of the driver's side panel. A tiny detail hidden beneath layers of dirt and age. Small enough that nobody else seemed to notice it. He stopped. Emily saw the change in his expression instantly. "What is it?" she whispered. Jack stared at the spot for several seconds. Around them, the laughter faded into the background. The noise of the auction seemed far away. He could not explain why. But suddenly the $120 car felt a lot more interesting than it had a minute ago. Jack did not say another word until the coupe was loaded onto a borrowed trailer. The auction yard continued buzzing around him, but his attention remained fixed on that tiny detail near the lower edge of the driver's side panel. It was barely visible beneath years of dirt and oxidation. Most people would never have noticed it. Most people were not Jack Carter. Emily climbed into the passenger seat of his aging pickup and watched her father through the windshield. She knew that look. It was the same expression he wore when diagnosing an engine everyone else had given up on. Quiet, focused, curious. "You found something, did you not?" she asked as he climbed behind the wheel. Jack started the engine. "Maybe." Emily smiled. "That means yes. It means I need a closer look." The drive back to their garage took nearly 40 minutes. The road stretched through the outskirts of Charlotte beneath a bright afternoon sky. Traffic moved steadily. Radio stations changed. Neither paid much attention. Jack's thoughts kept returning to the coupe. The more he replayed what he had seen, the more unusual it felt. Not because the detail itself was dramatic, because it seemed out of place, like a single sentence from a different story somehow hidden inside the wrong book. By the time they reached Carter Auto Repair, the sun had begun drifting lower toward the horizon. The garage was small, worn, and far from impressive. The paint on the exterior walls had faded years ago. The office windows needed replacing. One of the neon letters on the sign stopped working every winter. Yet to Jack, it represented something important. Stability. Survival. Home. Emily jumped out of the truck before it fully stopped. "Can we look now?" Jack laughed softly. "You are not even pretending to be patient. I got that from you." He could not argue with that. Together they rolled the coupe inside the main service bay. Dust floated through beams of sunlight entering from the open garage door. The old vehicle looked even more forgotten under proper lighting. Dents, scratches, surface rust, years of neglect. Everything about it seemed to support Vanessa Hartwell's opinion. Everything except the feeling in Jack's gut. He grabbed a clean rag and slowly wiped away dirt from the area that had caught his attention. Emily stood beside him holding a flashlight. Neither spoke. The garage felt unusually quiet. As more dirt disappeared, a small series of stamped numbers emerged from beneath the grime. Jack froze. Emily leaned closer. "What is that?" Jack narrowed his eyes. "I am not sure." The numbers appeared old. Factory stamped. Not scratched by hand. Not random. Deliberate. His pulse quickened slightly. Every vehicle carried identification numbers. Yet these were not where they should have been. He grabbed a notebook and carefully copied them down. Emily watched him work. "Is it important?" "Maybe." "You keep saying maybe." Jack smiled faintly. "Because that is the honest answer." The evening passed quietly. While Emily completed homework at a small desk inside the office, Jack searched old vehicle databases and collector forums. Most results led nowhere. Several numbers matched nothing at all. A few produced partial records that seemed incomplete. The deeper he searched, the stranger things became. Around 8 o'clock, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. None of it made sense. The vehicle appeared ordinary on paper, yet certain records seemed missing. Ownership history contained unusual gaps. Registration information simply stopped and restarted years later. Cars usually left trails. This one seemed to disappear for long stretches of time. Emily eventually walked over carrying 2 cans of soda. "Still nothing?" she asked. Jack accepted the drink. "Actually, that is the problem." "What is?" "There should be something." She frowned. "That sounds confusing." "It is." Outside, evening shadows stretched across the parking lot. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Jack returned to the vehicle and studied it again. He moved around it slowly, examining details he had ignored earlier. Then he noticed something else. Near the rear wheel well, hidden beneath layers of faded paint, there appeared to be the outline of an old decal. Almost completely covered. Almost erased. But not entirely. His heartbeat picked up. "Emily." She looked up immediately. "What?" Jack pointed toward the faint shape. "Bring me the flashlight." A few minutes later they stood side by side staring at the partially concealed outline. Neither knew exactly what they were seeing. Yet both knew it did not belong there. Emily tilted her head. "Was it a logo?" "Maybe." "Another maybe." Jack laughed. "Sorry." He carefully traced the faded shape with his finger. Suddenly a memory stirred somewhere deep in his mind. A racing magazine. An old photograph. Something he had seen years ago. The feeling arrived before the memory itself. Recognition without understanding. Before he could think further, his phone vibrated on the workbench. An unknown number flashed across the screen. Jack almost ignored it. Almost. But something told him to answer. Hello. A calm voice spoke on the other end. Mr. Carter? Jack frowned. Yes. There was a brief pause. My name is Robert Lane. I heard you purchased a certain vehicle at today's auction. I would like to make you an offer. Jack stared at the phone for a moment after the caller introduced himself. The garage suddenly felt quieter. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Emily looked up from the workbench and immediately noticed the change in her father's expression. Who is it? She asked. Jack raised a finger, asking for a second. You heard about the car? He said into the phone. The voice on the other end sounded calm and professional. That is correct, Mr. Carter. News travels quickly in certain circles. Jack glanced toward the dusty coupe. Less than 8 hours earlier, nobody wanted it. Most people had laughed at it. Now strangers were calling to buy it. The timing bothered him. What kind of offer? Jack asked. $5,000. Emily's eyes widened the moment she heard the number. Even from several feet away, she could tell what had been said. $5,000. For a car purchased that morning for $120. Jack remained silent for a moment. The offer was tempting. Very tempting. $5,000 would cover months of expenses. It would repair equipment in the garage. It would ease worries he carried every single day. Yet something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Just incomplete. I appreciate the offer, Jack said carefully. But I think I need more time. There was a short pause. Understandable, Robert Lane replied. Should you change your mind, I would appreciate a call. The conversation ended politely. No pressure. No argument. Yet after the call ended, Jack felt more unsettled than before. Emily walked over immediately. $5,000? She asked. Jack nodded. $5,000. For a car everybody hated this morning? Apparently. Emily folded her arms. That seems suspicious. Jack smiled despite himself. That is exactly what I was thinking. Outside, darkness slowly settled across Charlotte. The garage parking lot emptied. Traffic noise faded into the distance. Inside, curiosity continued growing. Jack returned to the faded outline near the rear wheel well. He carefully cleaned another small section of paint using supplies from his workbench. Inch by inch, the hidden shape became clearer. Emily held the flashlight steady. Can you tell what it is now? She asked. Jack leaned closer. His heartbeat quickened slightly. Maybe part of an old sponsor decal. Sponsor? Racing teams used them all the time. Emily's eyes brightened. You think it was a race car? Jack laughed softly. Slow down. But privately, the possibility had already entered his mind. The shape looked familiar. Too familiar. Somewhere in the back of his memory, he had seen it before. The problem was figuring out where. Hours passed. Emily eventually fell asleep on the small office couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders. Jack continued working alone. The garage felt peaceful. Safe. A small island of quiet surrounded by darkness. Around midnight, he found something unexpected. Hidden beneath layers of paint near the trunk lid was another series of markings. Different from the numbers discovered earlier. Older. Fainter. Yet clearly intentional. Jack copied everything into his notebook and began searching through old racing archives online. Most searches produced nothing. Dead ends. Incomplete records. Forgotten photographs. Then, just after 1 in the morning, a grainy image appeared on his screen. Jack froze. The photograph was decades old. Black and white. A racetrack crowded with spectators. Several vehicles lined up near the starting area. Most were impossible to identify. But one detail caught his attention immediately. A partially visible sponsor logo. The shape looked remarkably similar to the faded outline hidden beneath the coupe's paint. His pulse quickened. He enlarged the image. Then enlarged it again. The picture quality was terrible. Yet the resemblance remained. Not proof. Not certainty. Just another question. Another piece of a puzzle he did not yet understand. Jack leaned back in his chair. Exhaustion pressed against him. Doubt followed close behind. What if he was imagining connections that did not exist? What if the auction crowd had been right? What if this was nothing more than an old, neglected car with an interesting story attached to it? The questions lingered. Around 2 in the morning, he finally shut down the computer. Before heading home, he glanced once more toward the coupe. The vehicle sat quietly beneath the lights, revealing nothing. keeping its secrets. Yet somehow, the silence felt different now, as if the car was waiting. The next morning arrived too quickly. Jack had barely slept when the sound of a vehicle entering the parking lot pulled him from his thoughts. Through the office window, he watched a dark SUV roll to a stop outside the garage. A man stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. Older, well-dressed, confident, not someone looking for routine repairs. Emily noticed him too. "Customer?" she asked. Jack slowly shook his head. Something told him this was not about repairs. A moment later, the office door opened. The man smiled politely and extended his hand. "Jack Carter." Jack nodded. "That is me." The stranger glanced toward the dusty coupe sitting inside the garage. Then he smiled again. "My name is Harold Bennett. I represent someone who has been searching for that car for a very long time." Jack studied the man standing in his office doorway. Harold Bennett looked to be in his late 60s. His gray suit was perfectly pressed. His shoes were spotless. Everything about him suggested experience, patience, and purpose. Yet it was not his appearance that caught Jack's attention. It was the sentence he had just spoken. Someone had been searching for the car for a very long time. Emily immediately stopped what she was doing and looked from her father to the visitor. The garage suddenly felt smaller, quieter, more serious. "Searching for it?" Jack asked carefully. Harold nodded. "That is correct." His eyes drifted toward the dusty coupe sitting beneath the garage lights. Although until yesterday, nobody believed it still existed. Jack folded his arms. "Who exactly do you represent?" Harold smiled politely. "I am afraid I cannot answer that yet." Emily frowned. "That sounds suspicious." Harold laughed softly. "A fair observation." Even Jack smiled slightly. The tension eased for a moment, but only for a moment. Harold stepped closer to the vehicle and examined it without touching it. His expression changed subtly as his eyes moved across the faded paint, the worn body panels, and the areas Jack had already cleaned. Recognition flickered across his face. Not excitement. Recognition. As if he were looking at an old photograph brought back to life. "May I ask where you found it?" Harold said. Jack explained the auction, the neglected condition, the $120 winning bid, the laughter from the crowd. Harold listened carefully. When Jack finished, the older man simply shook his head. "Remarkable. You know what it is?" Jack asked. Harold hesitated. "I know what it might be." Emily noticed the wording immediately. "Might be." Harold nodded. "There are still questions that need answers." He opened his briefcase and removed several photographs. Old photographs. Some were faded. Others carried creases from decades of handling. Harold spread them across the workbench. Jack leaned closer. Emily joined him. The images showed race tracks from another era. Crowds, drivers, mechanics, pit crews. A world that seemed to belong to a different time. Then Jack saw it. One of the photographs contained a vehicle whose shape looked remarkably similar to the coupe sitting in his garage. His heartbeat quickened. The details were difficult to make out, but the resemblance was undeniable. "That is it?" Jack asked quietly. Harold studied the photograph for several seconds. "Perhaps." "You keep saying perhaps." Harold smiled. "Because certainty is expensive. Responsible people wait for evidence." The answer frustrated Jack, but he respected it. Hours later, after Harold left, the questions remained. In some ways they felt heavier than before. The visitor had not provided answers. He had only confirmed that the mystery was real. Emily sat on the edge of the workbench while Jack examined the old photographs again. "Do you believe him?" she asked. Jack thought for a moment. "Yes." "Why?" "Because he looked at the car the same way I did." Emily nodded slowly. She understood. Some people looked at a vehicle and saw metal. Others saw history. That afternoon, Jack continued researching every clue he could find. The hidden numbers, the faded sponsor outline, the unusual records. Piece by piece, fragments of a story began emerging. Yet none of the pieces fit together completely. Every answer led to another question. Every discovery revealed another gap. By evening, rain clouds gathered over Charlotte. The sky darkened earlier than usual. Thunder rumbled somewhere far away. Inside the garage, Jack sat alone at his computer after Emily had gone home to finish a school project. The quiet gave his doubts room to grow. What if he was wrong? What if he had allowed curiosity to cloud his judgment? $5,000 was still a life-changing amount of money. More offers would probably follow. Bills were real. Responsibilities were real. Dreams were not always practical. The thought lingered longer than he wanted to admit. Then his email notification sounded. One message. No subject line. No introduction. Just a single scanned document attached to the email. Jack opened it. His eyes narrowed immediately. It appeared to be part of an old registration record. Most of the information was faded or incomplete, but one detail remained perfectly readable. A name. Jack stared at it. Read it again. Then a third time. His pulse quickened, because even he recognized the name. It belonged to someone who had once been famous across the racing world. Someone whose career had become the subject of documentaries, magazine covers, and racing history books. Jack slowly leaned back in his chair. Rain tapped softly against the garage windows. The room suddenly felt very still. Then his phone rang again. Another unknown number. Jack answered cautiously. Hello. A deep voice spoke from the other end. Calm. Confident. Familiar somehow. Mr. Carter, my name is Marcus Steele. Jack froze. Everyone who followed racing knew that name. Marcus Steele was a legend. One of the most respected drivers in the history of American motorsports. The voice continued. I believe you may have something I would like to see in person. For a second, Jack thought he had misheard the name. Marcus Steele was not simply a retired race car driver. He was a living legend. The kind of person whose photographs hung in museums and whose victories were still discussed decades later. Yet the voice on the phone sounded calm, almost casual. Mr. Steele? Jack asked carefully. That is right. The voice carried a quiet confidence earned through years of experience. I apologize for calling so late. Jack glanced at the rain-streaked windows of the garage. No need to apologize. There was a brief pause. Harold Bennett contacted me this afternoon, Marcus continued. He mentioned a vehicle that recently surfaced. Jack looked toward the dusty coupe. It sat exactly where it had been all day, silent and ordinary. Yet somehow it no longer felt ordinary. You know about it? Jack asked. I know enough to be curious. The answer sounded familiar. Curiosity. That same word seemed to follow the car everywhere. Marcus continued. I would like to visit your garage tomorrow morning if that is acceptable. Jack hesitated. Why? The racing legend chuckled softly. Because sometimes history hides in places nobody expects. After the call ended, Jack remained seated for several moments. Rain tapped gently against the roof. The fluorescent lights cast pale reflections across the concrete floor. Everything felt surreal. Emily returned from the office carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. She immediately noticed his expression. Another weird phone call? She asked. Jack laughed softly. You could say that. He told her about Marcus Steele. Every detail. Every word. Emily's eyes grew wider with each sentence. The Marcus Steele? She asked. Apparently. The one from all those racing documentaries? That would be him. Emily stared at the coupe. Okay. Now this is definitely suspicious. Jack smiled. I am beginning to agree. That night neither of them focused much on anything else. While the rain continued outside, Jack organized the documents he had collected. Old registration records, auction paperwork, photographs, notes, fragments of information that seemed unrelated until placed side by side. Yet, even together, they failed to reveal a complete picture. There were still missing pieces. Too many missing pieces. Around midnight, Emily finally yawned and stretched. Dad, she asked. Yes. What if everybody is wrong? Jack looked up. Meaning, what if the car is not valuable because of money? The question lingered. It sounded simple, but it struck something deeper. Jack thought about Harold Bennett's photographs. About the faded sponsor outline. About Marcus Steele's interest. None of them had spoken about money first. They had spoken about history. About stories. About things worth remembering. Maybe, Jack said quietly. Emily smiled. I think you like that answer. Maybe I do. The next morning arrived gray and cool. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind clean air and bright skies. Jack opened the garage early. He spent hours carefully cleaning more sections of the coupe. The process revealed additional details. Tiny marks. Faint traces of old paint. Small clues hiding beneath decades of neglect. Every discovery seemed to suggest the same thing. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make this car disappear. Around 10 o'clock, a small crowd began gathering outside the garage. Word had spread faster than Jack expected. Local car enthusiasts arrived first. Then a collector. Then a reporter from a regional automotive publication. Nobody knew the full story. Yet everyone sensed there was one. Emily watched through the office window. They are multiplying. Jack laughed. People get excited about mysteries. You mean they get excited about being right? Jack could not argue with that. Shortly before noon, a black pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Unlike the luxury vehicles that had appeared recently, this one looked practical, unpretentious, driven by someone who cared more about purpose than appearance. The driver's door opened. An older man stepped out wearing jeans, boots, and a simple navy jacket. There were no assistants, no cameras, no entourage. Yet the moment a few people recognized him, the parking lot grew noticeably quieter. Marcus Steele had arrived. The racing legend walked toward the garage with calm, measured steps. He shook Jack's hand firmly. Then he greeted Emily with the same respect he showed her father. That detail immediately impressed Jack. Marcus did not waste time with introductions. His eyes moved directly toward the coupe. For several long seconds, he simply stared at it, not speaking, not moving, just looking. The crowd outside remained silent. Even Emily stopped fidgeting. Finally, Marcus stepped closer and ran his hand lightly across the faded paint. His expression changed, not dramatically, just enough to reveal recognition. Then he crouched beside the lower body panel where Jack had first discovered the hidden numbers. Marcus studied the markings carefully. 1 minute passed, then another. The garage felt completely still. When Marcus finally stood, he looked directly at Jack. There was something unexpected in his eyes. Not excitement, not surprise. Respect. The kind of respect one expert gives another when they both recognize something important. Then Marcus glanced toward the growing crowd outside and quietly said 7 words that immediately changed the atmosphere inside the garage. "This is bigger than I expected." The words settled over the garage like a sudden change in weather. "This is bigger than I expected." Marcus Steele did not sound excited when he said it. He sounded concerned. That difference mattered. Jack noticed it immediately. Emily noticed it too. The small crowd gathered outside the garage noticed it as well. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Marcus continued studying the coupe as though he were looking through the faded paint and into the past itself. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "Bigger how?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "I am not ready to answer that." A few disappointed murmurs came from outside. Marcus ignored them completely. He crouched again beside the hidden markings and carefully traced them with one finger. "What I can tell you is this." He looked directly at Jack. The people who laughed at this car were looking at the wrong thing. Emily smiled quietly. She had known that from the beginning. Marcus stood and walked around the vehicle a second time. Every movement was deliberate. Every glance seemed to confirm something he already suspected. Harold Bennett arrived shortly afterward and joined the inspection. The 2 older men exchanged a look that required no words. They both saw something important, yet neither appeared eager to discuss it publicly. That alone made Jack even more curious. By mid-afternoon, the story had spread beyond local enthusiasts. More reporters arrived. More collectors called. Several people stopped by the garage pretending they just happened to be in the neighborhood. Nobody believed them. One collector offered $10,000. Another offered $25,000. Jack declined every proposal. Not because he knew the car was worth more, because he still did not know what he actually had. Late in the afternoon, a familiar luxury SUV rolled into the parking lot. Emily recognized it before anyone else. "Oh," she said softly. Jack looked through the office window. Vanessa Hartwell stepped out wearing designer sunglasses and a perfectly tailored white jacket. The same confidence she had displayed at the auction remained intact. Yet something about her expression seemed different now, more serious, less amused. She walked toward the garage while several reporters immediately turned their cameras toward her. Vanessa ignored them and approached Jack directly. "Quite a crowd," she said. Jack smiled politely. Apparently, her eyes moved toward the coupe. "I heard Marcus Steele came to visit." "He did." Vanessa paused briefly. "Interesting." It was obvious she wanted more information. Equally obvious that she was not going to get it easily. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Vanessa surprised him. "I may have judged the car too quickly." Emily nearly dropped the flashlight she was holding. Jack raised an eyebrow. "May have." Vanessa laughed softly. "Fine. I definitely judged it too quickly." The honesty caught him off guard. It caught her off guard, too. Sometimes the truth sounded strange when spoken aloud. She glanced toward the vehicle again. "What are people saying?" Jack shrugged. "Different things." "And what do you believe?" That question lingered. Because the truth was complicated. Jack still was not sure what he believed. He believed the car mattered. He believed it had history. He believed Marcus Steele would not spend an entire day studying an ordinary vehicle. Beyond that, certainty remained elusive. I believe there is a story hidden somewhere inside it, Jack finally answered. Vanessa nodded slowly. For the first time since they met, she seemed to respect the answer. As evening approached, the crowd gradually thinned. Reporters left to file stories. Collectors returned home. Harold Bennett departed after a long conversation with Marcus. Before leaving, Marcus asked Jack a simple question. Have you considered bringing the car to Charlotte Motor Heritage Hall? Jack recognized the name immediately. It was one of the most respected automotive history centers in the region. Why? Jack asked. Marcus smiled faintly. Because some mysteries deserve proper witnesses. Then he left. The statement stayed with Jack long after the parking lot emptied. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep in the office, Jack sat alone beside the coupe. The garage felt peaceful again. Quiet. Familiar. Yet his thoughts refused to settle. The offers. The reporters. Marcus Steele. Vanessa Hartwell. Harold Bennett. None of it made sense. 5 days ago, this vehicle had been forgotten. Now it seemed impossible to ignore. Around 11 o'clock, Jack returned to cleaning another section near the rear panel. He worked slowly, patiently, not searching for treasure, searching for truth. Then the cloth in his hand stopped moving. His breath caught. Hidden beneath another layer of faded paint was something he had not expected to find. A number, larger than the previous markings. More deliberate. More important. He carefully cleaned around it until the entire sequence became visible. The moment he finished, he felt his pulse quicken. Not because he understood what it meant, because he recognized it. Somewhere in the stack of old documents on his desk, he had seen that exact number before. Jack hurried to the workbench and began searching through papers. Registration records. Photographs. Notes. Then he found it. The old scanned document from the previous night. The one connected to a famous name from racing history. The number matched perfectly. For several seconds he simply stared. Rain began tapping softly against the garage roof again. The familiar sound filled the silence. Then his phone vibrated. A new message appeared on the screen. It contained only one sentence. No greeting. No signature. No explanation. Just 7 words that immediately sent a chill through the quiet garage. Do not sell the car to anyone. Jack read the message 3 times before lowering the phone. The screen glowed softly in the darkness of the garage. Do not sell the car to anyone. No name. No explanation. No indication of who had sent it. Just a warning. Outside, rain continued tapping against the roof. Inside, the old coupe sat beneath the fluorescent lights, silent as ever. Yet the atmosphere had changed. The mystery no longer felt like curiosity alone. It felt personal. Jack looked back toward the matching number on the document spread across his workbench. There was no mistake. The sequence hidden beneath layers of paint matched perfectly. Someone had tried to bury the vehicle's identity. Someone had succeeded for decades. Until now, he barely slept that night. Questions followed him into every quiet moment. By sunrise, the rain had stopped. Emily arrived early, carrying a paper bag filled with breakfast sandwiches. The moment she walked into the garage, she knew something was wrong. You did not sleep. Jack smiled weakly. Not much. Emily placed the food on the workbench. New clue. Jack handed her the phone. She read the message and frowned immediately. That is creepy. A little. Do you think it is a threat? Jack considered the question. Surprisingly, he did not. The message felt urgent, but not hostile. More like a warning from someone who knew something he did not. No, he finally said. I think somebody wants to protect something. Emily looked toward the coupe. Or somebody. The thought lingered. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus Steele returned unexpectedly. This time he arrived alone. No reporters followed him. No crowd gathered behind him. He seemed unusually serious as he stepped inside the garage. Jack showed him the document. Then he showed him the hidden number. Marcus studied both carefully. His expression remained unreadable. Finally, he looked up. Where did you get this record? Jack explained the anonymous email. Marcus listened quietly. When the explanation ended, he nodded once. That makes sense. Jack blinked. It does. More than you realize. The answer only created more questions. Emily folded her arms. Everyone keeps talking like they know something. Marcus laughed softly. Fair criticism. Then he became serious again. There are stories in racing history that never made it into books. Jack listened carefully. Marcus continued. Sometimes people disappear. Sometimes projects disappear. Sometimes entire chapters get erased because they are inconvenient. He looked toward the coupe. And sometimes those chapters come back. The words settled heavily in the room. By afternoon, another development arrived. Charlotte Motor Heritage Hall contacted Jack directly. They wanted the vehicle examined by a panel of historians and restoration experts. Not next month. Not next week. Tomorrow. The request alone told him everything. Interest had become urgency. News traveled quickly through collector circles. Faster than Jack could control. Faster than anyone could stop. Offers continued arriving throughout the day. $25,000. $50,000. $100,000. Each proposal seemed more unbelievable than the last. Yet Jack rejected them all. Not because he knew the final value. Because he still did not know the truth. Late that evening, Vanessa Hartwell returned. This time she was not wearing her usual confident smile. She stood beside the garage entrance and looked at the vehicle for several seconds before speaking. People are talking about this car everywhere. Jack nodded. Apparently. Vanessa hesitated, then surprised him again. I owe you another apology. Jack raised an eyebrow. Another one? She smiled faintly. The first one was for laughing. Her eyes moved toward the coupe. This one is for assuming I knew more than you. For a moment neither spoke. Then Emily walked over holding a flashlight. That is actually a pretty good apology. Vanessa laughed. A genuine laugh this time. Not the one from the auction. Not the laugh of someone looking down on another person. Something different. Something humbler. The conversation ended when Jack's phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered immediately. A woman's voice greeted him. Calm. Professional. Mr. Carter, my name is Rebecca Sloan. I am the director of Charlotte Motor Heritage Hall. Jack exchanged a glance with Marcus Steele. The woman continued. Tomorrow morning, we would like to present our findings publicly. Publicly. The word changed everything. Public meant witnesses. Public meant answers. Public meant the mystery was approaching a moment of truth. After the call ended, Marcus looked toward the coupe one final time before leaving. At the door, he paused. Bring every document you have. Jack nodded. You think we are finally going to learn what this car is? Marcus smiled, but there was no amusement in it. Only certainty. No. Jack frowned. No. Marcus opened the door and stepped into the cool evening air. Then he looked back. I think we are finally going to learn why somebody worked so hard to make sure nobody ever found it. The next morning felt different from every morning that had come before it. The mystery was no longer hidden inside a quiet garage. It was stepping into the light. Jack woke before sunrise and sat alone for a few minutes outside his small house. The air felt cool. The sky glowed with the first hints of dawn. Across the street, everything looked ordinary. Yet inside his chest, nothing felt ordinary anymore. 5 days earlier, he had spent $120 on a forgotten car. Now historians, collectors, journalists, and one of the most respected names in racing history were waiting for answers. Emily appeared beside him carrying 2 cups of coffee. You are thinking too much again. Jack smiled. Probably. She sat beside him. Are you nervous? He looked toward the horizon. A little. Emily nodded. Me too. The honesty made them both laugh. By 8 o'clock, the coupe was loaded onto a trailer and headed towards Charlotte Motor Heritage Hall. Traffic seemed slower than usual. Every red light lasted longer. Every mile felt heavier. As they approached the museum complex, Jack noticed news vans already parked outside. Satellite dishes. Camera crews. Reporters speaking into microphones. The story had become much bigger than he ever imagined. Inside the hall, the atmosphere felt surprisingly quiet. Professional. Respectful. Historians moved carefully between displays. Experts reviewed documents. Restoration specialists examined photographs. Nobody rushed. Nobody speculated loudly. People here respected evidence. Marcus Steele arrived shortly after Jack. Harold Bennett followed. Even Vanessa Hartwell appeared, standing quietly near the back of the room. She no longer looked like someone waiting to be proven right. She looked like someone waiting to learn the truth. The examination lasted for hours. Every hidden number was documented. Every marking was compared against archives. Every faded clue was analyzed. Jack watched the process unfold from a distance. For the first time since buying the car, he was not the one searching for answers. He was simply waiting for them. And waiting proved harder than searching. Around noon, Rebecca Sloan gathered everyone inside the main presentation hall. Reporters filled rows of seats. Collectors occupied the front sections. Historians and specialists lined the sides of the room. At the center sat the coupe itself beneath bright lights. It no longer looked neglected. It looked important. Rebecca stepped onto the stage. The room gradually fell silent. She spoke carefully, methodically. She explained the hidden markings, the missing records, the unusual manufacturing details. Piece by piece, the evidence began connecting. Jack listened closely. So did everyone else. Then a large image appeared on the screen behind her. An old racing photograph. The same one Jack had discovered days earlier. Gasps spread quietly through the audience. More photographs followed. More records. More connections. The story that had been scattered across decades was finally beginning to take shape. Yet one crucial piece remained missing. One answer still sat just beyond reach. Rebecca paused and looked toward Marcus Steele. The racing legend slowly stood. The room immediately grew quieter. He walked to the stage carrying a thin folder that appeared almost ordinary. Yet the expression on his face told a different story. Marcus opened the folder and removed a single photograph. He held it carefully, as though it mattered, because it clearly did. I have spent most of my life around race cars, he began. I have seen legends. I have seen myths. I have seen stories grow larger than reality. His voice remained calm, steady, honest. But every once in a while, reality turns out to be larger than the story. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Marcus placed the photograph onto the presentation screen. The image filled the room. Jack felt his breath catch. Emily grabbed his arm. Harold Bennett lowered his eyes. Even Vanessa looked stunned. Because for the first time, everyone could finally see the complete picture. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to understand why someone had hidden the vehicle. Enough to understand why records had disappeared. Enough to understand why people had spent years searching. The room remained completely silent. Marcus looked toward Jack, then toward the coupe, then back toward the audience. There is one final document, he said quietly. One document that explains everything. The words seemed to hang in the air. Every camera pointed toward him. Every reporter stopped typing. Every collector leaned forward. Jack could hear his own heartbeat. Marcus rested his hand on the folder. Before I show it to you, there is something everyone in this room needs to understand. He paused, long enough for the silence to deepen, long enough for anticipation to become almost unbearable. Then he looked directly at Jack Carter and said the one sentence nobody in the room expected to hear. This car was never supposed to be sold at auction in the first place. The room remained silent after Marcus Steele spoke those words. This car was never supposed to be sold at auction in the first place. Hundreds of eyes stayed fixed on him. Cameras remained frozen. Nobody wanted to miss a single detail. Marcus slowly opened the final document and placed it beneath the projector. The image appeared on the large screen behind him. It was not a sales record, not a registration form, not a racing contract. It was a letter, a personal letter written decades earlier by the original owner of the vehicle. The handwriting filled the page with careful precision. Marcus looked toward the audience before speaking. This vehicle was part of an experimental racing project that never reached the public. The project was abandoned after financial difficulties and changing industry priorities. Most of the cars were dismantled. This one disappeared. He paused. The room remained perfectly still. According to this letter, the owner arranged for the vehicle to be hidden rather than destroyed. He believed one day someone would rediscover it and finally understand what it represented. A soft murmur moved through the audience. Jack stared at the screen. Emily held tightly onto his arm. Marcus continued. For decades, collectors searched for this car because they believed it was gone forever. They were looking for a machine. He glanced toward Jack. What they failed to understand is that they were actually looking for a story. The words settled gently across the room. Then Rebecca Sloan stepped forward with the final valuation report prepared by the museum experts. Every major detail had now been verified. The hidden markings, the documents, the history, the identity. There were no remaining doubts. The coupe sitting beneath the lights was authentic. More than authentic, it was unique. One of one. The room erupted into conversation. Reporters rushed to file updates. Historians exchanged excited reactions. Collectors shook their heads in disbelief. Yet through all the noise, Jack remained quiet, because he remembered something nobody else in the room had experienced. The laughter, the auction yard, the moment everyone dismissed the car without looking twice. Rebecca eventually raised her hand and restored order. There is one final matter. The room fell silent again. A representative from a prestigious collector group stood and announced their formal offer. $6 million. Gasps spread through the audience. Several people looked stunned. Others looked impressed. A few simply smiled. Emily covered her mouth. Jack lowered his eyes. The number barely felt real. Marcus Steele walked over and extended his hand. Congratulations, Jack. Jack shook it. Thank you. Marcus smiled warmly. You know what the best part is? Jack glanced toward the vehicle. The money. Marcus laughed. No. He looked around the room. The fact that you saw value before anyone else did. For a moment, Jack did not know what to say, because that was the part that mattered most. Not the headlines. Not the cameras. Not even the $6 million. The important part was that he had trusted his instincts when everyone told him he was wrong. Across the room, Vanessa Hartwell slowly approached. The confident businesswoman who had laughed at the auction seemed different now. Humbler. Thoughtful. She stopped in front of Jack and looked directly at him. I owe you one more apology. Jack smiled. You have already given me two. Then make this the final one. Her voice softened. I laughed because I thought I understood value. She glanced toward the coupe. Turns out I only understood price. For a second, neither spoke. Then Jack nodded. We all miss things sometimes. Vanessa smiled. A small smile. Grateful. Relieved. The kind that appears when someone is offered grace instead of humiliation. Hours later, after the interviews ended and the crowd dispersed, the museum hall finally grew quiet. The famous car remained under soft lights. Reporters had gone home. Collectors had left. The excitement had faded. Jack and Emily stood alone beside the vehicle one last time. Emily looked up at her father. You know what is funny? She asked. What? Everybody thought you bought a worthless car. Jack laughed softly. That is true. Emily smiled. But I never did. Those words hit harder than any headline ever could. Jack rested a hand on her shoulder and looked at the old coupe. Not with pride. Not with triumph. With gratitude. Because sometimes life rewards people in unexpected ways. Sometimes dignity wins quietly. Sometimes character is noticed. And sometimes a single father who refuses to stop believing finds himself standing in front of a miracle disguised as rust and dust. As the evening sun poured through the museum windows, casting long golden reflections across the floor, the story finally felt complete. Not because a car sold for millions. Not because experts confirmed its value. But because a little girl saw the world recognize the same goodness she had always seen in her father. And perhaps that was worth even more. If this story reminded you that real value is often hidden beneath first impressions, share your thoughts below and tell us what part stayed with you the most. And if you believe that kindness, patience, and quiet dignity still matter, consider joining us for more stories where ordinary people discover that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones everyone else overlooks.